Still energetic? There you go, Donald. Love you so much. Now, here's a personal note. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about this. When I hear the word compliance or regulation, my brain goes, innovation dies. Because they kind of like work opposite. So I'm curious to hear, want to leave that with you guys. Because innovation in itself means you're pushing boundaries outside of the regulatory frameworks we have. So that's the part I struggle with. So as we've seen a lot more happening with the ETFs, the biggest banker on the planet is now crypto's biggest CMO, our friend Larry Fink. When I hear him speak, I'm like, I feel conflicted. Price goes up, but then my friend is like, Chan, you don't need to worry. By the time that happens, you'll probably find another chaotic market to play with, because that's what I look for. Now, moving on. We have a new panel coming up, and let me introduce them to you. It's going to be moderated by Inbar Preiss. And backstage, we call her Inbar Preiss. Inbar, are you with us? There you go. We have Daniel Seifert from Coinbase EMEA. Next up, we have Lisa Cameron from the UK Parliament. Nice to see you. She's writing a book on the accidental MP. Copy's coming soon. And lastly, we have Matthew De La Vente from KYAX. I got that right? Right? Guys, do me a favor. Ask them hard questions. All right? That's all I need. Okay? Cheers. Enjoy. Take it away, Ingvar.
Hi, everyone. Hope you had a good lunch. My name is Inbar Preiss. I'm a regulatory correspondent for DL News. I've been covering crypto policy and regulation over the past 2 years, so I'm really glad to be on this panel talking exactly about that. And I've been taking note of the kind of tectonic shifts we've been seeing in politics around the world. And crypto is not isolated from that. The UK elections, the EU elections, the US elections, all the geopolitical tensions, they're all reflected in this market. So I'm glad that we get the chance to unpack these kinds of issues here in this afternoon. So maybe we could do a quick round of introductions if everyone could just say hello to the listeners and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Matthew De La Fuente. I'm the CEO of KYAX. We're a regulatory reporting tool for crypto businesses. My background is very straightforward. Investment banking, management consulting, 15 years in and around Silicon Valley with VC and PE-backed growth companies. And I've been in digital assets for the past 7 years.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lisa Cameron. For the past 9 years, I've been a member of Parliament in the House of Commons. We're in an election period currently, so there are no members of Parliament at this point in time. But prior to the election, my role was to chair the cryptocurrency and digital assets cross-party group in the Parliament and to progress the regulatory framework and legislative components in the UK Parliament.
And last but not least, hi, good to see you all, guys. My name is Daniel. I'm Regional Managing Director for Coinbase in Europe.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm based in Brussels, so the talk of the town is the EU elections. And I think there were no real shockers in the results. There has been a shift to the far right. But I think what did surprise people is that President Macron called for snap elections and the dissolution of the National Assembly. So I'd love to kind of reflect, maybe Daniel as you know, our regional manager. What does this mean for crypto? Of course, Macron has been kind of promoting this crypto hub image of France, and a lot of the industry is very grateful, I think, from my impression of that. So will his legacy survive after these elections?
So I think, I mean, as you say, I think it was certainly here with the snap election in France was a big unexpected news. and I might actually also say even a gamble for Macron, for President Macron. As to what potential future political parties might bring is like, I think it's too early to tell, quite frankly, right? Like, I think here in Europe, we don't necessarily have, let's say, clear divides across the aisle as they have in the United States. I think, you know, many parties kind of like very open towards the technology, seeing the promise of the technology, the possibilities that we have. And I think, you know, as we've seen in Europe with the early regulation with MiCA, I think also Europe has taken a very different approach simply to the technology.
So any other thoughts, maybe reflecting on the European elections? Because, of course, I don't know if you have any thoughts to add there.
Yeah, I mean, not specifically about the European elections, but just elections in general. I think it brings to my mind that the work we have done in the Parliament for the past 3 years has been very important to have that baseline of understanding and knowledge in the Parliament. But with all elections, new people come to the Parliament, and therefore this is always a work in progress and always something that the industry needs to continue to engage with, to reach out to those who are newly elected, those parties who are perhaps going to be more influential as well in coming elections, and to make sure that everything is cross-party, non-partisan, and that the industry is able to showcase its work in the parliaments in the UK and across Europe, and that that's a normative feature of what happens in our parliaments.
Maybe we can linger on the UK for a moment. So the industry in the UK was expecting to see a new legislative proposal to regulate the industry a bit more comprehensively, a little bit like the markets and crypto assets regulation does in Europe. But it seems, I think, with these elections, that timeline will shift. So what are you expecting to see in the UK, and what are the biggest challenges for the industry right now?
Yeah, you know, we worked so hard over the past 3 years, and no one was keener than I to see this legislation coming forward prior to the election. And I think with the best will in the world, if, you know, there should be a new government forming in the UK, which if you look at the polls is you know, a possibility, then you know, prioritization falls onto health, onto education, onto those types of programs. I think it's even more vital now that we make sure that this sector has a voice in the Parliament and is able to mobilise interest and support from MPs to make sure the momentum isn't lost. I feel like we're, you know, coming into a good place in the UK. We've done a lot to engage government and a lot to engage MPs from all the different parties, and we need to continue that momentum going, because there's a window of opportunity for the regulatory frameworks to come forward, to give that clarity to investment, to make sure that alongside EU counterparts, the UK can fulfill its vision of becoming a cryptocurrency hub. And I think that, you know, working together with industry partners is even more vital now that we're in an election period.
So we'll see between France and the UK, Paris versus London, who will make it as the crypto hub in this region. But Matthew, with your kind of bird's eye view of how, you know, the industry is trying to adjust to all these different regulations that are coming into play in different jurisdictions, maybe you can touch on regulatory arbitrage, which is a fun word, but what does it mean, and how is the crypto industry supposed to prepare for these coming years where there's so many, you know, rules that are changing from place to place?
Sure. So KYAX is in 99 jurisdictions, so we really do have a bird's eye view of global jurisdictional developments. And I actually studied regulatory arbitrage because I am that fascinating as a person. So with regards to regulatory arbitrage, it is the ability to make money across jurisdictions without going to jail. It is a fantastic concept. In the UK, we have a number of Web3 lawyers who have evolved to listen to businesses to understand what it is they actually want to achieve, and then structure their processes, their governance, their language, their products, their services around the regulation. And if that involves your legal entity being incorporated in Delaware, but your payroll being issued out of Dubai, and your token being issued out of Germany, with payments going through Cayman, then that is the structure that they will advise. It is a fundamentally different approach than many lawyers who will simply say no. With regards to Europe, with regards to, I think, the interests of this crowd, I firmly believe that the same human beings who are running, writing, and implementing the regulations are the same people who wrote and ran the implementation of the traditional finance regulation. Therefore, we will see a very similar league table in digital assets as we do in traditional finance. If you want a double gold star, you're going to go to Germany, you're going to go to BaFin. If you want, an A grade without a gold star, you'll probably end up in London, maybe Paris. If you want to just get by, then, Cyprus and Malta are great options. If you want to check a box, Cayman, BVI. All of these jurisdictions have distinct regulatory market positioning that's available to cover all of our needs as an industry.
So in Europe, the markets and crypto assets regulation, it starts coming into application by the end of this month for stablecoins. But from the end of the year onwards, exchanges, any firm that's providing crypto asset services will need to pick one country to register in. So Coinbase has opted for Ireland. So in Dublin, Coinbase will be rubbing shoulders with the Metas and the Apples. What grade would you give Dublin? How's Coinbase doing?
So I don't think it's about the grade. I think it's about the ability for that particular entity to engage with the European market as a whole with legitimacy levels and stringent levels and just an overall sense of branded legitimacy that they want. And like you said, Meta, Google, Apple, Coinbase have all chosen Ireland. That seems like a reasonable fit for that particular brand.
So a solid A. I'm joking. It's fine.
No comment.
But Daniel, it would be interesting to hear what was the process for Coinbase, in choosing Ireland. I know that's been spoken about also by your colleagues, but if you could give us maybe a little bit of an overview and how you're preparing for MiCA and the implementation of these new rules.
Sure, absolutely. And, as you brought up the process, how we got there, right? It was a multi-month, even more than a year kind of process of evaluating, looking at different possibilities, locations, and so forth. And then in October 23, we announced that we were going to go for Ireland. The Irish regulator, the Central Bank of Ireland, they're certainly incredibly advanced when it comes to regulating fintech. You just gave some examples there. Incredibly forward. They have incredibly deep understanding. And I think, one of the other factors in our decision was also we just had already large operations in Ireland that have been there for many years, very successfully. So I think from both these kind of angles was a very good fit and a very natural choice. As you mentioned, the preparations for MiCA, and you're right, end of this month, we're going to see the provisions for stablecoins come into force, and then end of the year also for the rest of MiCA. It's very honestly, it's a big lift, right? So even for large companies like ours, it's like a lot of work going into this, a lot of preparation. We're tracking it very closely. As you can imagine, it's a large program, large transformation, large project. So tracking it very closely, doing well on this one. But I think, we'll see, and maybe the concern is that for some of the smaller players in the industry, these are quite heavy investments that they will have to make. And, to see how they will be coping with these, how will they be taking this forward, how will the industry, the structure, the landscape, the players, how will that evolve over the next, 12 months?
And I have another question for you, Daniel. So major exchanges like Binance and OKX have made statements about which stablecoins they will delist by the end of June, given new MiCA regulations and certain stablecoins just not, the issuers simply not meeting the requirements. Has Coinbase taken a certain approach as the clock is ticking?
So as we just said, the stablecoin provisions will be the first ones to come into effect, really, end of the month. And that has been, and I mean, you work for DL News, it has been covered widely in the news, and like lots of interest and lots of discussion back and forth from various players and how they're acting. I think, what's really important to say is like, and this is often the case with like new legislation, right? As it kind of comes into force, we will see the framework bed down, we'll see it come into force and play out in practice. I think for Coinbase, what I can say is we continuously monitor and assess which tokens fulfill the MiCA rules when they come into force. And I think what's important to stress is also that this is a continuous undertaking, right? So this is not only like a point-in-time kind of assessment that you do, but it's something that you have to continuously monitor and ensure the compliance.
So there's no hard deadline for you on the 30th of June?
There's obviously a hard deadline that sort of starts to come into effect, and then you have to start to monitor and take decisions with every single token at any given moment.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. And Lisa, in the UK, stablecoin laws are also coming into effect this summer because the Financial Services and Markets Act was passed. So it doesn't even matter if there's elections coming up. This is already on the rails to come into force. So could you give an overview of maybe what you've been hearing from the industry and if there's any concerns as the deadline also for stablecoin laws in the UK comes closer?
Yeah, we've more been hearing, I suppose, from industry a bit about the uncertainty with the election period coming as to, how these issues will be taken forward as priorities in the next couple of years. I think, what we want to do really is to make sure if there are many new MPs, for instance, who come into our parliament, that we have constructed education programs, that they can have informed debates about the sector, that they are able to raise important questions, that where things need to be challenged, they are, where the industry's voice needs to be heard, that it can be. And I think it's just really important we've laid the foundation for that over the past few years, that we continue to do that work to host the events that have been so successful in the Parliament through the All-Party Parliamentary Group, where, this industry has gone from a few years ago to many people thinking this is like the Wild West, we don't want to be involved, to actually looking at the potential, understanding that we, and the stablecoins part of this, we're on the cusp of a digital revolution internationally, and the UK wants to have a leadership role in that regard. And I think it's just really very important that we continue our programme of education in the Parliament and we make sure that it isn't partisan, that the sector has a voice, and that actually the sector is representing those voices across the UK into the Parliament. I was so heartened when I went to Manchester to help to launch Stand with Crypto, with Coinbase, just, in the last year, to hear
Maybe
about...
you could just explain what Stand with Crypto is.
Yes, so Stand with Crypto is going to be galvanising the sector across the UK, those who are involved in it, and giving them a voice within political discourse in terms of perhaps, I've been advocating for perhaps a manifesto for the election, but whatever form it takes, making sure that there is a galvanised voice for industry right across the UK, so that legislators know how important this sector is. It's going to be really pivotal for not just now, but for the next generation. When I think of my own children, they're very digitally native. Everything is becoming digitalized, and I think that this sector is going to become more and more powerful in terms of the work that we can do together, but also in terms of the potential that we can offer for jobs of the future for young people across the UK and across Europe and internationally. So please be very proud of everything that you're doing and continue to engage with our parliaments to make sure that you have a voice, a very pivotal voice at the fore of that.
So Stand with Crypto was initiative also with Coinbase in the US, and then it was brought over across the Atlantic into the UK. So what has been the impact of this kind of initiative? Is it useful to have, as you said, galvanized voice to maybe translate the priorities of the crypto industry as players are shifting around in parliaments around the world?
So I think, you know, as Lisa was just saying, right? I think in Europe we take a slightly different approach to Stand with Crypto than we take in the United States, but I think it's also very obvious, right? It's a very different environment. And here the focus in Europe is really much more to shine the spotlight on Web3 builders and creators. So really the people, and we find them like very embedded in their communities and creating jobs very locally. And I think it's important that we as an industry kind of stand up and show what Web3 is and the potential of the technology, the potential of the jobs that get created, the companies that start to grow in Europe. I mean, we've been saying this in a number of places that through things like the MiCA regulation, we've kind of managed to bring more and more talent to this region. So I think where it would have been that a few years ago we had maybe 40% of global blockchain developers in the United States, and only like 20% in Europe. Now it's like 30-30. So you have like, it's kind of reduced in the United States because of the lack of regulatory clarity that they have. But it's kind of increased in Europe, right? And I think, like next to the regulation, what we want to do is we want to make sure that the industry kind of stands up and shows its best foot forward. And so this is really Stand with Crypto.
Yes, please.
So I also want to just bring on another act, which is the Digital Operational Resilience Act, which is kind of twinned with MiCA. And
just to clarify that this is in Europe.
In Europe,
yeah,
but passported out as per usual. So anybody who's engaging with European counterparties, you all should be aware of this as well. The Digital Operational Resilience Act essentially translates to you should probably begin moving off of Google Sheets. For this industry, that's going to be super painful. It's not move everything off Google Sheets. It is the fact that if things go bad, can you recover your data? If things go bad, can you tell us exactly your financial position 1 week, 3 hours, 2 minutes ago? If you can't do that, then you should probably be talking to your back office teams. This regulation is probably just as important as MiCA, and bearing in mind the hiccup that Google had, I think a couple of weeks ago, where a customer's entire company was wiped from the cloud, including the backups, which, by the way, I didn't think was possible, but it was. This is the type of disaster recovery that DORA is designed to cope with, and combined with MiCA, it acts as a really, really powerful institutional builder for this industry.
I also heard that this act is a huge burden and might essentially purge the industry of the small players who maybe don't have the funds to comply with this higher barrier of cybersecurity. Do you think that, because of MiCA and DORA together, the industry is going to just look completely different in 2 years' time?
So this is my personal opinion, but essentially regulators love big businesses because they can find them. Small businesses are an annoyance. Small businesses take up a huge amount of time and don't provide enough revenue. As long as those small businesses don't reach a certain threshold, don't cause too much disruption in the broader market, I believe that many, many European regulators will simply let them be until they reach a certain threshold. And then, they'll really start finding them and looking at them, and like very much like Coinbase, they'll have to pay for playing.
Maybe we can shift a little bit to the US as well. Firms like Coinbase, like Kraken, are embroiled in these legal battles with regulators. I know that's been a topic of discussion on these panels, on basically any crypto panel. But do you have any maybe additional view or takeaway on the US kind of industry and regulator relationship, especially when it comes not just to federal level regulators, but also state regulators?
Yeah, I think it's and I'd love your opinion as well. I think it's a huge mistake to look at America as a single regulatory entity. It is very fragmented. There are huge opportunities to get digital assets into regulatory frameworks that you wouldn't really consider, you wouldn't really imagine. A colleague of mine went and bought a farming bank and made the farming bank support her digital asset company under the farming regulations. It's not just the SEC, it's not just the CFTC, it's not just credit union legislation and regulation, it's not just community banking regulation. There is state-based regulation. Wyoming has a radically different approach than Florida. Texas has a wonderful environment for miners. Every single politician, Democrat or Republican, that I've spoken to in Texas, which is about 13, has been very, very pro-crypto mining in Texas. The US should not be seen through the prism of the SEC. And while there's huge amounts of risk there, there are huge amounts of opportunities, especially at the state level.
And do you think the November elections are going to change anything at all about this kind of dynamic? Bringing it back to the election theme.
The US is a huge, complex, very slow-moving country. And the election will not see any significant changes towards crypto that manifest for years. And so, sure, Trump, if he is the crypto president, if he does win, and changes the SEC's attitude somehow, some way, regardless, we're talking about multiple years of change ahead of us.
Well, I have maybe a final question for each of you, and then we'll see if we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience, so you can start thinking. But what would be the best case and worst case scenario for the crypto industry in your respective jurisdictions, so being EU, UK, and US, if you look into the next 5 years?
I can start, and then we can just kind of go across the bench. Yeah, best case outcome, I would say maybe coupled regulatory clarity plus institutional adoption plus consumer protection. So like these 3 themes together, they could make us like really strong, right? Like regulatory clarity, I would say we're like on a really good path already, right, with MiCA. I mean, now it's gonna, the legislation has to bed down, and because it's a fast-moving sector, then we'll have to see how this works in practice, and if there's any changes, or future regimes that are needed, we'll see that. Institutional adoption, it started at the start of the year, very obviously, right? Everybody has seen the ETFs in the United States, like institutions coming like really strong. But also in the UK partially, and you can comment on this much better, Lisa. We've had a lot of debate and discussions. Is there things that we can do to have stronger institutional adoption? And I think ultimately for the sector would be a good thing. And then last, consumer protection. I think, again, in the United Kingdom, we've seen a lot of movement. In Ireland at the moment, we're seeing consultations, but also across the broader region. And I think it would just make the sector kind of like more, it would kind of give us the rules of the road and give people confidence to interact and invest with this asset class.
And the worst case scenario?
None of that.
Maybe I can slip just an extra question for you, Daniel. Do you imagine that EU regulations are allowing for extra partnerships, acquisitions? For example, we've seen Robinhood acquire Bitstamp. We've seen a partnership between Deutsche Bank and Bitpanda. Is that, you know, a regulatory induced activity in the EU markets?
So I don't know. I mean, like you would have to ask Robin Hood what kind of induced them on this move,
I'm
right?
trying.
Yeah, okay. Well, I would say that you know, no, the way I look at, or we look at MiCA is probably just more about a sort of a harmonization of the landscape and regimes that have been in play. And I would say, I mean, it's not like that we didn't have anything before that. I mean, it was different, right? But like we did have, so, you know, Matthew brought up BaFin earlier today. They had this crypto custody license that they introduced in 2020 and then came into force 21. So there were regimes, right, and regulation. And I think, you know, this sort of question of, do you acquire any players and when and how and why, they probably would have existed in a similar sort of logic.
Thanks. And what about the UK?
Yeah, so I feel like the worst thing would be if we took our foot off the pedal post-election, started to focus wholly on other issues, and the work that's been done loses its momentum. I feel that that would do the industry a great disservice. On the positive side, I feel like the work we've done to galvanize opinion across all of the parties in the all-party group in Parliament means that there's a strong foundation for everyone to continue to work together to create Digital Britain, to make sure that we are adopting international best practice, and that we are harnessing the potential of the industry, really, because I think it's going to be so crucial in creating those jobs of the future for young people across the UK. And I think we owe them a debt to make sure that we harness the potential of the industry so that they can meet their potential, they can be included in the industry moving forward, and we can create a really positive leadership role in this sector too. I'd also like to see more financial inclusion and interoperability and sort of interconnectivity, and I think actually this sector has a really poignant role to play in terms of the United Nations Sustainable Goals, creating financial inclusion for disadvantaged people across the world. So I would also like to see the UK connect internationally to make sure that that happens.
I know our time is nearly up, so I'll make this quick. With regards to the United States, I would say it would be regulatory alignment against digital assets. Right now, the SEC leadership is against digital assets. The SEC weebies, the weebies are we be here and you be gone. The people underneath Gensler and his leadership are actually quite moderate, quite pro-digital assets. And the CFTC is pretty universally pro-digital assets, as well as some states. What would be really, really bad is if every single one of those pillars lined up against digital assets. Not likely to happen, but possible. And then the catastrophic thing for the United States is that both the investors and the talent in the US gives up. They simply move offshore. It's already happened somewhat with Puerto Rico. It's already happened with folks moving from San Francisco to Texas, to Florida, to Hawaii. It could go further. They could be pushed to Costa Rica, to Europe. That would be very bad.
Thank you so much, guys. Let's see. I mean, we have 3 minutes. It's kind of borderline. Does someone have a burning question in the audience? Do you want to come here? I'll give you the mic.
Hi, thank you very much for the interesting topic. I have a question for Daniel regarding the fungibility of Bitcoin. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I understood in the OTC market there can be different prices for different Bitcoins with characteristics like Bitcoins mined with green energy or without transaction history versus a discount for Bitcoins with illicit transaction history. What's your take on this in the coming 10 years and how does Coinbase separate between them?
Oh, you're really testing my blockchain knowledge there. No, sorry, but just can you give him the mic again? Sorry. Just to understand, were you talking about ordinals versus non-ordinals?
No, not inscribed Satoshis or something. Just, for example, Bitcoin's mined with pure green energy or a mix of green and black energy, or?
And if they should have or would have different prices?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting question. I don't. Let's take this offline. Interesting question there.
We have 1 minute and 50 seconds if someone has a question. Okay, well, I'll ask my questions. Let's see. For FIT 21, the bill in the US, do you think that's actually going to make it through the legislative process? Will the US actually see a crypto regulation that the industry is looking for?
That's a good question. So FIT 21. So I think, just quickly on recapping what the regulation was about, or the legislation was about, right? Was kind of like giving the CFTC jurisdiction over anything that was considered a commodity, like Bitcoin, for example, giving digital asset exchange venues a possibility to register as securities as exchanges with the SEC, and then issuers the possibility to register their tokens with a view that over time they could sort of evolve from securities to commodities if there was sufficient decentralization, right? And I think, it's a piece of legislation that we've very much welcomed. As Coinbase, we've kind of asked for move towards regulatory clarity for a year, or probably the better part of 2 years now. So I think, we're very much looking forward to such legislation successfully being brought through. I think this one was the first ever to be brought to the House, but I mean, obviously at the end didn't go through.
Yeah, so we'll still need to pass the Senate. But yes.
I just wanted to add that legislation never happens by chance. There's a huge amount of work and interface that goes on behind the scenes in terms of engaging active members of parliament, making sure that there's dialogue with government, making sure that any concerns and issues are ironed out at early stages. And this is quite a complex process. So I would just say to industry, it's more important than ever, given the pivotal stage that you're at, that you're engaging in the US, in the UK, in the EU, and making sure that you're at the forefront of sensible legislation coming through.
If I had more time, I'd ask, Coinbase and the others about their budget for lobbying money when it comes to elections. But luckily for you, time is up, and we'll take it offline. Thank you so much. It's been a really insightful conversation about policy around the world, a really timely moment, when all these elections are taking place and things are shifting. So really great to see how crypto is reflected in all of that. Thank you.
Which way do we go? That way.
All right. Exciting times. Thank you so much, sir. High five here. Appreciate it. Thank